Hello, everybody. Today I'm on with my longtime friend, Kimberly Palm. And I invited Kimberly on today because because it's Christmas. And this beautiful time of year, which is all about celebrating the light. It doesn't matter what your belief system is. This time of year is about the celebration of light and the return of light that comes with the winter solstice, and also the light that Yeshua brought into the world. So I have Kimberly Palm on today. We actually haven't talked in months because I've been so busy traveling and going around the world and diving into my soul's greater work as a filmmaker. And eventually you will see some of the footage that I have come up with. It's been so much fun traveling and learning about these ancient sacred spaces around the world. But today I have Kimberly on. We're going to be talking about Yeshua, this time of year, this Christ Mass time of year when we celebrate his birth and his life. And I've invited Kimberly on because she does work with Yeshua and Mother Mary and Mary Magdalene. And we're going to be talking about his story, his true story, the story of his pre-birth, what I'm actually working on a show right now called Birthing Humanity, and it's about the preconception of humanity. And so we'll talk a little bit perhaps about Yeshua's preconception, the conception, the birth, and a little bit about his life and the light and the love that he came to be in the world. So Kimberly, it's so great to see you here and connect after all this time.
Thanks.
I did get a chance to read your book, well, technically about the first half before I got distracted by something else shiny, probably. But your book is really fascinating. So go ahead and let the audience know your book, where they can find it, and the basics of what it's about.
I had this printed at a local printer. So whoops, let's see if I can get it on camera. I don't know if I can. Let's see. There we go. It's called, it's not showing up on the camera. There we go. Walking with Yeshua and Mary Magdalene. And my best friend actually designed that. She drew that picture of them, which is, there we go. It's hard to get it in front of this camera. My best friend created this picture. And I had no intention, just, Victoria, of writing yet another book. I already have 2 that are bestsellers on Amazon, and both of those almost got me divorced and kicked out of my family because I spent so much more time on the book than I did on my family. And I didn't think I was going to write any more books, but what happened is there were a lot of people spreading lies about Yeshua all over the spiritual community. There was just one lie after another, and it was getting me upset. And he could see how upset I was. And he came to me and he said, I know you're upset because you were there, and they're basically, it would be like, okay, so let me explain it to you. So how would you like it if I knew nothing about you and your family, and I went all over the internet and made up some stories about you, and we're telling everybody all these crappy stories about your life and your birth and your family and who you were, and none of it was true? And it was just all over the place, and everybody's believing these stories. And it was getting me upset. It was triggering me because I was there. If I wasn't there and I didn't have that experience with him, I wouldn't be triggered like I've been triggered. And so he said, I want you to write my real story. And I'm like, what do you mean? And he's like, I want you to write up what you remember, and then whatever you can't remember, I will give you the rest of the information, and you will put this out in a book. And so I asked him what to call it, and we decided Walking with Yeshua and Mary Magdalene. My best friend also, who designed the cover, Reverend Sarah Nash, she helped me actually come up with the title too, as well as the cover, because I had different choices for my title. But I wrote this book to set the record straight, because I go into the real history, his story, not what they have told you, because everything they've told has been a lie. There were 777 books in the original Bible that was compiled, and they removed 700 of them. And then what was left over, they rewrote over and over again. And there was a huge post that went around the internet about the King James Bible, that King James rewrote the Bible completely different to suit his purposes. So whatever Bible there was before King James got a hold of it was completely different. And they rewrote everything, and they did it over. And then when they At some point, they also changed his name, which we know about because his name was not Jesus, and there was no letter J. To this day, there's no letter J in Hebrew or in Aramaic. So I talk about that in the book, what his real name is and why it is and all that. But basically, this book that I wrote, it's only available through me, through my website. You can go to my website, spiritualgrowthjourneys.com, to the books page. And if you scroll down, you'll see it, the third one down, and it's an ebook that gets automatically sent to you when you buy it for $17, because the information in this book is so controversial. The Catholic Church would see it as completely heretical because I basically expose terrible things that the Catholic Church has done throughout history. I expose a lot of garbage about them that they've done. They've done a lot of bad things. And it's a huge expose and a huge reveal of information they don't want you to know. Like, they don't want you to know that Miriam of Magdala was his wife and that they had children together. They don't want you to know any of these things. So yeah, that's pretty much it. It's really all about me being just really having my buttons pushed by all the lies out there. And he was like, okay, let's get the real information out. And that was pretty much it in a nutshell.
Okay.
So yeah.
So let's start with pre-birth.
Mhm.
What can you tell us about his mother, about his family, about his environment?
So his mother was actually in Essene. So the Essenes were a spiritual community, and there, some of the people in there were Jews, not all of them, because there were Essene communities all over the world. They even had Viking Essenes. They had an Essene community up in I think Norway or wherever, way up there. So I mean, there's Essenes all over the world, but the Essenes were a worldwide spiritual movement. Mostly based out of Israel, but then they had a sect up in northeastern India, and they had a sect, in Scandinavia. They had them all over, and in Europe, in different places, southern France, just different places like that. And so his mother was an Essene, and the Essenes were a mixture. I actually have a whole chapter in my book explaining who they are and what they did in their day-to-day customs. Or you can read the book by Dolores Cannon, Jesus and the Essenes, but she only covers a very tiny amount of the information. I think I cover a little bit, a lot more about who they are and what they did. But they practiced a mixture of the teachings from Atlantis and Lemuria. They taught that stuff, the ancient Egyptian mystery school teachings, the Zoroastrian teachings, the Jewish. They mixed in Israel, in the commune that was in Israel. They mixed in the Jewish teachings, because a lot of the ones in Qumran, which was the main headquarters for the Essenes, most of those people were Jewish. So they mixed in a lot of the Jewish traditions as well. But they practiced the chakra system. They practiced a lot of stuff out of Buddhism and Hinduism that they practiced, because Buddhism and Hinduism had already existed for a long time before the time of Yeshua. And so they taught all about the chakra system, all that type of thing. So that's what Mother Mary was. She was actually a priestess. She was a priestess in that tradition. She was also what was called a Vestal Virgin back then. There are these women who were kept as virgins, and the high up society of the Romans would come and see these women and get advice and information. I actually visited the House of the Vestal Virgins in Rome, and we learned the story and the fate of all those girls. They would get these young girls that were virgins, that were like psychic and had like superpowers. They were like us now, where we're doing all these psychic things and everything. They'd be like me, and they would take these girls and they would, keep them in a really nice place. And all of the high up society people would come see them. And if they were to have sex with anybody or fall in love with anyone, they were put to death. They were actually put to death. They would kill them. And so Mother Mary actually escaped from that, because she fell in love with a Roman soldier who was not Roman. He was actually Greek. He was 100% Greek. He was actually a descendant of Zeus. And he was a Roman soldier, and he was what you call royalty, Greek royalty. And in Greece, he'd be royalty. He had royal blood in him, so he would have been like a king if there were kings in Rome. But he was a Roman soldier, and she fell in love with him. And he impregnated her with Yeshua. That's how Yeshua was born. There was none of this thing of women can impregnate themselves. That is a lie, another lie that's being spread, that a human woman can impregnate herself. If you are an actual human species, it takes a sperm and an egg in order to impregnate you. You can't impregnate yourself off a zygote or whatever you want to call it. You can't make your own baby without a male. And that is why God created a man and a woman, because to propagate the species, you can't procreate all by yourself. There are amoebas and maybe frogs, or I don't know, there's certain creatures on this earth that are able to procreate on their own, but not a human. There is no human on the earth that can do that. And there's people saying, oh, she practiced some ancient Egyptian ritual where she was able to impregnate her. No. That's all a bunch of baloney. She fell in love with this Roman soldier. His name was really long. I think I have his name in the book. I can't pronounce it. It's like 3 names, and it's a Roman name or a Greek name, and I can't pronounce it, but it's in my book. And they fell in love. He was actually murdered by the cabal because they found out that he had fathered this child that was going to be the savior. The Zoroastrians actually knew that the savior was coming, and that was the Magi. So the 3 kings that they talk about, those were Zoroastrians, and that is because Yeshua had a past incarnation as a Zoroastrian Magi. He was a Magi in one of his previous incarnations, and the Magi knew he was coming back again. They knew he was coming back again, and they were prepared for it. And the cabal took his father out. They just took him out. Okay. So then he was fatherless. Well, in the Essene community, it was a sin. You couldn't be a mother without a husband. You couldn't be pregnant, young woman. She was like 15, something like that, when she was impregnated. When she gave birth, she was 16. You couldn't be that old and not have a husband. And so they married her to Joseph, who was an Essene in the community, and he was quite a bit older than her, and he already had several children from a previous wife who passed away. His wife had passed away, and he needed a wife, and she needed a husband, so they put the 2 of them together and joined union. And so when Yeshua was born, that was who, his parents were, as far as he was concerned, were Joseph and Mary. But and it was not pronounced Joseph, it was pronounced Yosef with the Y, because there was no letter J in the Hebrew language or Aramaic back then. But that is the beginnings before leading up until he was born. And then of course they went to Nazareth, and they went there because they were doing, the Essene community was kind of in the hills in the near the Sea of Galilee. And the problem with that is the Romans were doing what they called the census. They were taking a census because they would take a census of the population, and you had to go to a specific, village. And Mother Mary apparently had to go to the closest village, I guess, that they could go to was Nazareth. So they went to Nazareth, and that's how they wound up there. And yeah, and she
So
went into like,
not Bethlehem.
I'm sorry, Bethlehem. I'm sorry. I'm half asleep, just so you know. I got 2 hours of sleep last night. So if I say stupid shit in this video, you'll know why.
And I'll edit it out.
Yeah, you can edit it
So
out.
my understanding
Bethlehem
is
is what I know.
that Mary was also royalty. She was basically a princess.
She was. So Mary descended from King David. I didn't talk about her bloodline. I just said she's a Essene, but her bloodline is she was a direct descendant of King David. And yes, she was royal blood.
Okay, so
Mhm.
Yeshua actually was
Mhm.
the prince.
He was a prince or king, and he was royal
And
on both
well, my
sides.
understanding, he was actually the king of the Jews. That's why when
Mhm.
he was murdered, for lack
Mhm.
of a better term, that they knew he was king of the Jews. That's why they put a crown on his head. But
Yeah.
It makes sense then, because she was the princess, that she would have been with a even though he was a soldier, he was also royal blood. So Yeshua was royal from both sides of his families, correct?
Absolutely. And if you look at the history of the kings, you would sit there and go, well, why didn't the bloodline of King David sit on the throne of Israel instead of Herod and this guy and that guy? Well, why do you think? It's the same reason that Prince Charles is sitting on the throne of England today, because they're reptilians, because they took over all of the real royalty. If you look at all of the real royals in the world, like whether it's King Arthur or whoever, you're always going to have you're going to see these reptilians coming in and tossing out the real royalty and taking over the throne. And so the throne of Israel was being run by an evil monster, Herod, whose wife had the head of John the Baptist, removed. She had John the Baptist killed. They were evil. They were reptoids.
Right.
And so the thing is that Mother Mary, would have been a queen on the throne. I mean, if it followed the bloodline the way it should have, she would have been on the throne. So then and back then, all throughout history, of course, they didn't usually put a queen in there without a king. They usually put the next son, whoever the boy was, would wind up being, the king, right?
Right. So he would have been,
he would have been the king of Israel.
Correct. And that is, well, of course, one of the reasons there was a hunt for him, because he was the crown
true
prince,
heir,
right?
Yeah.
He actually was a true heir, and this is the reason that also that they basically hid amongst the Essenes, because Mary needed to be kept hidden, right? So nobody really knew who the royal family was, but there were also prophecies that this Savior would, and I'd like you to speak to this as well. There were these prophecies from Isaiah that the Savior would be born to a woman named Mary. So every family had a daughter, had at least one daughter named Mary, just in case their daughter happened to be the chosen one.
Except it wasn't Mary, because that name didn't exist in Israel back then. It was Miriam, and it was Miriam or Yam, Miriam. And that was the original name. Mary is actually that's an English British name, as Mary.
Right. Yeah. So the prophecy was more than likely that he would be born to a woman named Miriam, which explains why Miriam is such a popular name, even still today.
Yeah.
So Mary was very pregnant with Yeshua, and they headed off to Bethlehem.
Yep.
So
not Nazareth.
Let's talk about that, because we know his birth is not in December. I think that's kind of become common knowledge that December for his birth was a total made up birthday.
No, December 25th is a pagan thing that comes from the birth of Nimrod. Nimrod was born on December 25th, and it comes back to all the Baal or Baal worship and all that. It goes back to that. And there's a whole long story, which I'm not even going to get into because I don't like to discuss it. It's negative, horrible stuff. So I don't want to talk about how Christmas was formed. It's actually a satanic holiday, realistically. His actual birthday in our calendar, so everybody who's listening has to understand that the calendar Yeshua was on at that time was called the Julian calendar, and it was from Julius Caesar. And the calendar that we're on now is this icky calendar, which again, there's a huge story about why they shifted the calendars, and that's another a whole enslavement thing. But the calendar
So we're on the Gregorian calendar.
Yeah, we're on the Gregorian
calendar, which was created by Pope Gregory.
Yeah, exactly. And there's really, really evil reasons why they did that, which I won't go into. But in the Julian calendar, he would have been born in March. And in our calendar, it was April 14 is what he told me when I asked him, what's your birthday? He said, well, Kimberly, on your calendar, it would be April 14th. Now, here's the interesting thing. What do you think tax day is always in the United States? Is April 14th. And they purposely picked that date. You have to ask, why would the cabal pick April 14th as tax day? Why that date? Because they pick dates based on a lot of their satanic stuff. All of their dates has to do with their satanic worship. And so April 14th is because what was Yeshua doing? He was turning the tables on the tax collectors and all of them, right? He was trying to get rid of all of that. it is an abomination to make his birthday tax collection day. They are abominating Yeshua. They're basically throwing it in his face and saying, haha, we're going to make your birthday into tax day because we know that you didn't like the tax collectors. And because Yeshua was kind of like Robin Hood, you know, get rid of all the wealth and spread it out to everybody. Everybody needs to have food and be taken care of, right? And so they made his birthday into tax day, and they made Nimrod's birthday into Yeshua's birthday, as well as the winter solstice time and all that, you know, all that kind of thing. And there's nothing wrong, by the way, with celebrating winter solstice, which has been celebrated for thousands of years. There's nothing wrong with that. And there's no devil worship involved with it at all. It really has to do a lot with the farmers and the farming. You know, there's a lot of holidays we celebrate that are traditions that are set forth by the farmers, you know.
It is a celebration of light. That's what I talk
Yeah.
about, that this time of year is a celebration of light. It doesn't
Mhm.
matter what belief system you have or what
Yeah.
holy day you celebrate.
Mhm.
It's all about a celebration of light.
Like
And the
Hanukkah.
solstice is about
Hanukkah's
right, the
light.
celebration of return of light. In
Mhm.
Christianity, it's a celebration of the return of the light. Right. Back to this. So this
Yeah.
time of year is a celebration of the return of light.
Yep.
And one of the issues I've found is that Christians get really bent and driven by this ego and judgment that is their holiday, and that it's, and then they don't understand that this is a time of year that is celebrated all over the world.
Yeah, by different
all over
cultures.
the world.
Yeah.
And that this time of the year is held as a holy time of year for
Mhm.
all these cultures. And so
Yeah.
it isn't just about Christmas. I mean, Christmas, as we talked about, it means Christ's Mass, which
Right.
I don't know anything about uh, Catholicism.
I do, because
That religion that's trying to take
yeah,
over the world.
I was a Catholic, so I know all about it.
So, and I know that Mass means something, but
Yeah.
I don't want to get into that. But the fact is that there are Christians who are literally hell bent
Yeah.
on believing that anyone who believes anything different this time of year is like a horrible human being, and then don't
Right.
deserve to celebrate their own
Yeah.
holidays. And this is about recognizing the holiness of this time of year, regardless of what your belief is. And Yeshua came as an example of the return of light, but it's by no means only about him. So anyway, this is about, for those who celebrate his life, this is about his birth and the return of light that came with him. So now let's talk about what really happened in Bethlehem
Mhm.
and his real birth story.
So, first of all, how the buildings were back then is you had a two-story building, and the bottom level was the barn, or where the animals were kept. And the top story of it is where the people slept and lived. Okay. And because, you know, heat rises, right? And so it's going to be warmer up on the top story, because the heat from all those animals down below helped heat them, and, you know, when it was cold. So that was good. And then they kept all the animals on the ground level, because then they had the brick floor underneath them, and they might have had some handmade carpets or something in there, depending on how wealthy they were or whatever. But basically, so the stable that he was born in, and the trowel, like, they found out that they didn't have a wood trowel, like they show you in all the pictures and everything. It would have been like a stone. The trowel that they put the water in and the food in, would have been all made of stone back then. So he was laid actually in a stone manger. It was not like some nice wood looking thing that looked like that, you know, held his body. It would have been a big stone, you know, dirt, or made out of dirt or whatever. And that's where he would have been in. But basically, that's where they went, because there was no room in the inn. That is true. There was no room in the inns. It was a tiny village. They didn't have room for him anywhere. So a family that they knew, that was actually, I think, you know, relatives or something. I mean, they knew them, took them in and put them in the stable. And what's interesting is they actually had to stay there for a while because, he was a newborn baby. You didn't just take a newborn baby and then travel home again back to Nazareth, which is where they came from. That was their city they actually lived in, was Nazareth. Qumran is where you go. Mary was not from Qumran. Mary was from Nazareth. Okay, so was Joseph. They were both from Nazareth. Qumran is where you go to be in the commune to do your studies. It's kind of like your college, your education program. It's where you go. It's where all the head rabbis and teachers were that put you through all of the, the priestess and training and all the different the Melchizedek training. They trained him in the order of Melchizedek, all that kind of stuff. That's what Qumran was. You go to the Essene communities to learn, to be part of the community, or to live there as part of the spiritual community. But there were people who had villages, that they lived in, that would travel to there, or send their kids there or something like that. So they were actually from Nazareth, but they traveled back there eventually. They stayed in Bethlehem for a while. The three wise men, as they call them, or the three kings, were magi, and they were Zoroastrians. One came from Qatar, one came from, I think it was Iraq. I put it in the book. It's in the book where they came from, but they were from some of the Arabic, areas. It was like Qatar and Iran or Iraq or something like that. And they came down because they knew that the Savior, who was a magi before, was going to be reborn. They knew, they had it all laid out in their charts and everything. When they finally met up with Yeshua, he was already 2 years old and living in Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason he was in Egypt is because when they went back to Nazareth, the people in the village alerted them that King Herod had sent an army to come and kill him. So they were very temporarily in Nazareth, and then they left in the middle of the night, basically, and they went to Egypt. They had to flee and hide in the Egyptian Essenes, because there was an Essene community in Egypt, a huge one. They took them in and they hid them there for a long time. And that is when Yeshua went through a lot of the ancient Egyptian mystery school teachings as a little boy. And I actually have a whole chronology in my book of every age, at each age, what I lay it all out, each age, what happened to him throughout his entire life, where he was living, because he was all over the world, where he was living, what he was doing there, what age, when did he meet Miriam of Magdala, where did he meet her, when were they married, all of this. I lay all that out in the book. But that's basically it, and the whole drummer boy story, that was just a fable to help children. It was a Christmas story for children, because Christmas was originally a Catholic religious holiday. Okay, it was Christ Mass. They would hold a mass in honor of Christ. There weren't any Christmas trees. There were no gifts. There were none of this commercial stuff that they do today. It was just a religious holiday. And then you would go have a dinner with your family after the Mass. So you'd go to Mass, and then you would go have a dinner. And so what has happened over the years, obviously, that has changed. But when he was born, there was no drummer boy, and that story was totally made up to teach little kids about Christmas. It was really just for the children, the little drummer boy story. Who was there? Well, there were angels there, of course, we know that. And then there were also people from the village who were there for his birth that were assisting. And the people who lived in the house that they were staying with, they were assisting. So those were the people who were there, not the wise men. That whole manger scene that they show you, they really should show a bunch of villagers standing there, not three wise men, because that is who was really there. And of course the angels, and there were more than one angel that was there, not just one. They always have one angel with the nativity, because I have many nativity sets. I have a collection of them. It was more than one angel. It was many angels. In fact, I'm thinking of taking all the angels from all my nativity sets and sticking them all around the back of my nativity to show that there were all these angels there, because there were a lot that were there.
So what about, and I'm just now remembering this, what about the shepherds? So it obviously was spring. Why else would shepherds be with
watching their
lambs,
flocks
right?
at night because it
That's
would have been
just
too cold. Yeah.
right.
In the winter,
So
in December, they would not be out with their flocks at night.
correct.
They'd
So
freeze their butts off and they would get hypothermia and die because they didn't
so,
have the
so
clothing.
how did they know
Yeah.
to come to the stable? It's like, did word just get out that the Prince of Peace had been born?
Pretty much, that's it. And the thing is that the Essene people, so you need to understand that Mother Mary, that they actually knew all along that she was going to be the mother of the Savior. They actually knew it from the minute she was born, that she was the chosen one. She was actually chosen a long time ago, and she is a Christed being. She is a Christed being because Christ,
Right.
the station of the Christ is a station, and it's a frequency and a consciousness level. And she was already from that high consciousness. She was already an ascended master. And so she was pre-chosen before she even came in, that she was going to be it. And the Essenes all knew this, because you have to understand who the Essenes were. They were doing all this really hardcore spiritual stuff. I mean, they would be able to do what I do, where they can communicate psychically, with whoever, the ascended masters on the other side. Melchizedek had been dead for a long time at that point, and they were able to talk to him, in meditation or whatever. So that's who they were. So they knew she was coming. They knew who she was. She was prepped her whole life for this event.
Right.
So the Essene community all kind of gathered around and supported their family because they all knew who he was. Now, did other people out in the world know who he was? Not really. It was really more known amongst the Essenes and some of the Jewish people, because you have to understand that that some of those Essenes, or a lot of them, were also Jews, and they had family and friends who weren't Essenes who they gossiped, because one thing about Jewish people is they have a reputation for gossip. It's a big thing, and they would gossip to everybody and tell everybody. So there were a lot of just regular Jewish people who knew that the Savior, was coming because of all the gossip. So
Right.
yeah, word spread.
Well, and they were expecting, however, a savior with a sword that would
Yeah.
rescue them from the Roman Empire. And I think that's
Mhm.
the reason the Jewish people didn't recognize him. Some people did, obviously, but there were a lot of people who didn't recognize him, or the Sanhedrin, the Sadducees and Pharisees, through their influence, tried to convince people that that's not who he was.
Yeah, well,
That works the same way today, right?
yes, that is true. And so what they were expecting was kind of a King Arthur type, where he was going to show up full body armor with this big sword of light or sword or what. Absolutely. That's what they were expecting. Yeah. They had a huge.
So then the story of King Herod after
Mhm.
Yeshua was born, my feeling is they stayed in Bethlehem for about 6 months before they went back to Nazareth.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
then King Herod, yes, made this proclamation. He found out that the Savior, this prince, had been born, and that this prince was the greatest threat to his kingdom. And then he put out a decree to murder every child under the age of 3.
Mhm. That is true. That all
Yeah.
happened. Mhm.
And so that's why they had to leave. And
Yeah.
I can't even, being a mom, even begin to imagine how horrifying that must have been
Yeah,
for.
they went village to village and they literally slaughtered every child that was 3 and under. I mean, could
Yeah.
you imagine? That was a boy, that was a male.
Well, and
know?
I imagine they probably didn't stop to check.
Yeah.
Yeah,
they might have even
let the
slaughtered
kids running
females
around
too.
naked. I don't think they bothered to even check.
They probably just slaughtered every little baby and everything that was
Yeah.
looked young enough. Yeah.
And to think that that kind of hunt took place again, we go back to how these dark beings are willing to just kill anyone that stands in their way, and they have no love
They
at all
have
for
no love
children,
ability. They
compassion.
have no heart chakra. They have no ability for love. They've got none of it, Victoria. They've got like no capacity for kindness, for compassion. They have zero compassion, like zero, like none. Like they'll just go burn down. These are the psychopaths who murdered almost 1 million people in southern France because they were Gnostic Christians. The Cathar people. I just went down on my tour of southern France, and all the Cathars who were devoted to Mary Magdalene. And they were practicing Gnostic Christianity, more of a spiritual form of Christianity that we should be practicing. And the Catholic Vatican didn't like that. They wanted all those people to conform to Catholicism, and they said they were heretics. So they literally went through, burned down hundreds of villages in southern France and murdered children and women, just slaughtered them. Didn't even ask any questions, just burned them alive. They burned so many people alive. It was ridiculous. Almost 1 million people that they killed, because the people at the top who order this stuff and have this stuff done have zero heart chakra, no compassion, no love, no nothing. And then the minions that are following orders, they're just like almost like non-player characters. They just do whatever they're told.
Right. So this is well, that happened during time of what I call when religion ruled the world. And it's the ultimate act of using God's name in vain.
Right.
And so we see that throughout history where men have used God's name as justification for harms against humanity, as justifications for war and murder and death. And so it is that ultimate act of using God's name in vain that we see as justification for all of these harms against humanity. And so I think people need to understand when they say, oh, I don't want to use God's name in vain by saying God's names. Like, that's not what that means. It's about the actual use of God's name.
To do terrible acts of atrocity.
Acts. Yes.
Yeah, things that God would never condone, because you and I know that.
Correct. And this belief that God actually approves the death and murder of some of God's children is that it's a complete lie. So anyway, let's get back to Yeshua's story. Because again, it's about this child that was born, that there's all these stories that have been created about who he is and the reason he came here. And so let's talk about that, about the real reason he incarnated at the time that he did, the real purpose for his life. And we know it was manipulated, of course, by the men who created religions in his name. So let's talk about that, because the birth, this time of year, we're celebrating his birth. And we also need to focus on celebrating his life, because in the spring, religions celebrate his death, but I don't see a lot of celebration of his life. So let's celebrate his life.
Yeah, they focus on the death.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he came here for the purpose. There's multiple purposes, but the main one is to liberate humanity from their suffering and from religions. He came here to actually abolish all the religion, because the religion was created to enslave humanity, all the religions, which is Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The Abrahamic religions were created to enslave people. And the reason I'm not saying Buddhism and Hinduism is because those are more spiritual practices. They're not like a religion with dogmas and doctrines where you have to do this or you have to do that, or we kill you and you're a heretic. You don't see Buddhist monks slaughtering people because they're not willing to meditate. Okay, that doesn't happen in Buddhism because it's a spiritual philosophy and a practice, and so is Hinduism as well. They're more of a spiritual practice, where you eat a vegetarian diet and you do this and you do that, but they don't have dogmas and doctrines. The dogma and doctrine are the Abrahamic religions, which is first Judaism, then Christianity, and then Islam. Those were all created and manipulated to control people and keep people enslaved in mind control. And he came here to abolish that first one, which was the Jewish religion, which wasn't called Judaism back then. It was called, they were called the Hebrews. The people were called the Hebrews because there was no letter J, again, people. So there weren't Jewish people back in the year 2000, zero, whatever. There weren't Jewish people back then. Okay. So he came for that. He came to liberate everyone. And he was the first ascension teacher. He was here to teach everybody how to ascend, how to go into their light body, how to commune with God. The biggest reason he came here was to teach us how to have a personal relationship with our creator who made us. That was his biggest reason for coming. And he wanted everyone on earth to be on the same sheet of paper and to all have a personal relationship with prime creator. And that was his biggest thing, and teaching peace and love and compassion and what we call the laws of one. Don't interfere with other people's free will is the number one rule of the law of one. Which is what the reptilians have been doing for 25,000 years, is removing our free will and usurping our free will, which breaks all the laws of the universe. So he was here to teach people how to connect, abolish the Abrahamic religion because it was manipulating and controlling and enslaving people, to give people their spiritual freedom, to have them have that personal loving relationship with their creator, and so on. And that was mainly his main reason for coming here.
To be the way shower.
To be the way shower. Yep, absolutely. I mean, you can sum it into that one word, is a way shower, but I gave the full explanation of what a way shower is. So yeah, it's a way shower.
Yeah. So when he talks about being the light and the way, it isn't about him. It's about him showing the way.
Exactly.
Right?
But we're all supposed to be the light and the way for each
Correct.
other. We're all
Yeah.
supposed to show each other the way, not just him, which is why he said, ye are like gods and you shall do bigger things or greater things than I. He said that because we're all supposed to be doing what he did and trying to achieve that Christed being status. We're supposed to work towards that.
Right.
So,
but it got, again, his life purpose and his teachings got turned into yet another religion. This is kind of the opposite of everything.
And he didn't want that, and he
Yeah.
never wanted it. Yeah, disgusting. So
what can you tell us about what they call the missing years of Christ, which we know they're not missing. They were conveniently hidden because it doesn't align with the history that the controlled narrative wants us to know about his history. So what can you tell us about his life between the time that, what's really interesting is that the books of the New Testament actually conflict with each other. If you were to take these four books, lay them side by side, you would actually see what looks like two different Jesus stories. They actually don't match up. They actually line up. So I've actually even heard the term the two Jesus, because like they're two different beings that are being written about, and somewhere they get convoluted and merged together and only one comes out. I actually heard a description a few years ago about two Yeshuas went into the temple and only one came out. And they're actually two different stories that have been converted to one.
Yeah.
And so they converge these two different stories. But then there's that after the age of 12 where he mysteriously disappears until he's 33. Well, we know that he went on a spiritual journey and he learned everything he could possibly learn about spiritual beliefs and spiritual practices all over the known world. So can you talk to that a little bit? Who he was, where he went, what he learned, how that was all created for him, knowing that he came from a very wealthy family. And it's not like he was a poor kid in rags. He actually, again, came from royalty and his family was very wealthy. So let's talk about that a little bit.
So first of all, his mother's uncle, Joseph of Arimathea, was actually the richest man in the world at that time. He had tin mines and metal mines all over. He owned a huge tin mine in Glastonbury, UK. He had property in Cornwall and Glastonbury. He had land all over the world that he owned. He owned a whole fleet of ships. He was very, very wealthy, and he funded all of Yeshua and his mother's, their whole family, but they had plenty of money. They were not poor. They were not paupers by any means. They were very well off. And I'm looking at my book here just to remind me the age, because my brain, it's so much information, my brain can't hold it all. I'm somebody who I have to write it down and I have to have it, because especially numbers, I'm not good with numbers. I'm more good with visual. I remember visual stuff. I don't remember numbers very well. So
Well, I don't think we necessarily go into the exact details, because I don't know
yeah.
pages of exactly where he went, but can you kind of give a brief
Yeah, I want to kind of go
overview?
over, I'm going to go over the chronology of his life. So when he was 6 months old, they basically went from, from Bethlehem back to Nazareth. They were there, for a while. And when he was age 6 months to 9 years old or something like that, somewhere in that time, they actually had to go into Egypt and escape so they wouldn't get killed. So he was there until he was 9 years old. The Magi visited him when he was 2. He studied alchemy and got his mystery school training. He learned how to turn like one thing into another. Alchemy, you can take a certain metal and turn it into gold or whatever. He learned how to do all that when he was in Egypt and a young boy. When he was 9 to 12 years old, he went to school in Qumran and went through all his training in Qumran. When he was 12, he took off with his uncle Joseph and went to Glastonbury, and was there until he was 14. And during that time, he studied with the Druids. He studied with and I was a Druid priestess in 2 past lifetimes, so I know all about that. In fact, I was in Glastonbury in one of my last lives. I was in Avalon. I don't know if anyone who's watching knows this, but Avalon, ancient Avalon, is actually in the higher dimensions, and there's a portal to it at Glastonbury Tor. So Glastonbury Tor is the portal to Avalon, which is where all the Druid priestesses were. And Merlin was there. He was actually one of my teachers. He was real, by the way. And Merlin is actually one of Melchizedek's incarnations. Melchizedek and Merlin are actually the same guy. So, okay. So he was in Glastonbury from 12 to 14, studying with the Druids. From 14 to 17, he came back and he attended school in Qumran again. They kept him hidden there. At age 17, he returned to his family in Nazareth for a short time. From 18 to 20, he went with Joseph of Arimathea up to northeastern India. And that is where he met Miriam, the Magdalene. And they were there for a couple of years. They got married. They brought her back down with her sister Martha and her brother Lazarus. The 3 of them came down and they settled, not their parents, but just the 3 of them. And they settled in the town of Magdalene, which was a village in Galilee area, in the in that area of Galilee in ancient Israel. And that is why she was known as Miriam of Magdala, or Miriam the Magdalene, because they didn't know her from being from India. They knew her from being from that local village because they lived there up until Miriam came into the forefront of society when they were like 30 something years old. They were just they were living in Magdala, right? So that's where they were. So from 18 to 20, he was in India. Age 20 actually is when they were married in a secret ceremony. Now their wedding was secret and they kept it secret. Why? Because, of who he was, and they didn't want her to get killed. He loved her and he didn't want her to get killed, because if you were the wife of him, the cabal would have gotten her and slaughtered her in 5 seconds. So they had to pretend like they weren't connected at all, weren't married, so that they could protect her from getting taken by the bad guys, which is what would have happened. And she's his twin flame, basically. He never had any other wives, just her. There's all these lies going around that he was married in Egypt, or he was married here and there, and he had a bunch of children with somebody. No, he didn't. He was never married to anyone except for Miriam, because she was his twin flame, and that's the only person that he was meant to be with. They were together before they came to Earth as Osiris and Isis. So Osiris and Yeshua's real soul name is Sananda. That's his higher self, is Sananda. But anyways, when he was 20, they returned back down to Qumran, and that's when he earned his white robe. because in order to get the white robe in the Essene community, you have to go through and graduate all your years of studies. It would be kind of like when you graduate college and you wear that college robe. You know how you wear a robe? It's the same thing back then. When you graduated from your studies in Qumran, you were awarded the white robe. So Yeshua was not ever wearing a white robe until he graduated. And then from that point forward, he wore the white robe with, I think, a purple sash. So age 20 to 22, he went back and was in Nazareth with his family, with Mother Mary and all his siblings, because he had like 8 other siblings. Age 22 to 24, he visited Tibet with his uncle. Him and his uncle went up to Tibet. And when he was there, he studied with the monks and he learned more about ascension. And he learned about walking out of your body and all that kind of stuff, and levitation. I mean, he learned all kinds of stuff. You know, you name it, he learned it from those monks. He was there from age 22 to 24. When he was 24 to 26, he returned to Galilee to be close to Miriam because he wanted to be near her because she wasn't with him when he was out, you know, traveling. 26 to 33, he was traveling all around the Middle East, Israel, Greece, and parts of Europe. You know, learning. He was with his uncle and they were traveling. His uncle funded all of it, traveling all over the place. And then when he was 33, he started to gather his apostles together and begin preaching and teaching, was at age 33. And that's where they get that magical 33 number, because 33 was not the year he died. 33 was the year he started preaching and teaching with all his apostles. And so they abominate and invert everything. So they made up this lie that he died at 33, when really that's when his incredible teaching started, was at age 33. So 33 to 39, he was teaching and traveling with his apostles and disciples. Miriam was with them. And then at age 39, they put him up on the cross at the hands of the Romans and the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin and Romans basically did that. So that's it. That's what I know. And how do I know this? People always ask me, how do you know this? And they do it in a snarky way because they don't believe me. I don't care if they believe me or not. I have my memories. First of all, I was there, number one. Number two, because anything I couldn't remember, I asked him to fill in the blank for me. I just had to talk. I've been chatting with him since I was a little baby, because he's just always with me. So I just asked him. I said, can you fill in these blanks? I don't remember. And then I have many people ask me if I'm Miriam the Magdalene. I have people who think I'm her all the time. And the answer to that is no, I'm not. She's not on earth right now.
Yeah, you just look a lot like her.
I look a lot like her. I do. Yeah, except my skin would be, if I wanted to look exactly like her, I'd have to make my skin several shades darker, because she was East Indian, and there's a picture on my wall back behind me of what she looks like, but her skin is very dark.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah, because she's from India.
Yep.
Right. So he spent 6 years teaching, and he had a very large following of people who were able to see past the narratives of the people in control, and they recognized him. And that then they also became way showers, right? Because they knew that he came here to teach peace, and he came here to teach unconditional love.
Yeah, agape.
And so the stories that he taught, I tell people that Yeshua was like the greatest storyteller that ever lived. And it's actually got really upset with me about that. He didn't tell stories. I'm like, oh my gosh.
You gotta be kidding. That's what he did.
Parables were. He knew that human beings learn best through stories. So he was an extraordinary storyteller. And what's really amazing about teaching through story is that he knew that because people learn best through stories, they will learn. When you read a story and then you read it again a few years later, you get something completely different out of it, because you're reading the story based on where you presently are. That's why he taught through stories, because there's such a powerful way of teaching and allowing people to learn from where they presently are. And so instead of telling people what to think, he told stories where people could then learn how to apply his teachings in their life where they presently were. So he actually didn't tell people what to think. He taught through stories intentionally. So
No,
people
he
could
taught through
think for
parables
themselves.
or stories. They were
Yeah.
parables, right? Yeah, they
Right.
call them
So
parables.
he taught in a way that people could learn through their own present understanding. And he didn't teach sin and guilt and shame and blame and resentment and
No,
all the
he didn't teach
spirit-based
any of
beliefs that
that.
are found in religion. Those were
No, he
all
didn't.
religious dogma
Those were made up.
created basically in vain in his name.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. All of his message. I was actually recently given my new mission that I'm going to be doing once the Service to Humanity funding comes through. I am not going to be doing the work I'm doing anymore. I'm going to be focusing on my nonprofit Service to Humanity. And it's all about peace and love. And so he told me many years ago that I came here to finish his teachings. Not just me, there's a whole group of us, Essenes that all came back. There's a lot of Essenes that came back, and we're here to continue the teachings. There's like 190,000 disciples of his that are back here in bodies again, that are going to go out into the world and all the apostles are back here as well, except for Miriam. She's the only one not in a body. But the other apostles are all here, Matthew and John and Luke and Mark, all of them are all in bodies right now. And we're going to be spreading his actual teachings, and it's really all focused on peace and love and peace and love and peace and love and compassion and kindness and respect and forgiveness and all of those things, and that is really what we're here to do. So
absolutely. And that's what his entire life purpose was. And so one of the insights I was shown a few years ago is that he did not come to atone for people's sins. He came to teach us what attunement looks like. And his ability to be so in tune with the Creator, so in tune with what the human potential is. That's why he was able to perform the miracles that he performed, because he was so in tune with these higher frequencies of love and light. And rather than celebrating that, it got turned into a fear-based religious belief that's been used to control humanity. So
yeah, it's all about controlling people. The entire religion was set up, and people will say, well, if you talk to him, why were you a Catholic for so long? And it's because I was put through that as a learning experience so that I could see it from the inside out, so that I can do the work I'm doing now, because I am helping thousands of for the last several years of my life, I've been helping thousands of ex-Catholics, of Catholics get out of the church and come into the light, as we would say. I've been helping a lot of ex-Catholics, and I wouldn't have been able to do all the important work I'm doing right now, not just ex-Catholics, but ex-Mormons, lots of ex-Mormons I've been helping, that have all left, and because they woke up and they realized that their religion is not good. And I wouldn't have been able to help them if I wouldn't have gone through all this, all the different years of being Catholic and understanding the church from the inside out, and actually going to the Vatican twice, walking through every area of the Vatican and really understanding who they really are, what they've been doing to humanity, and really, really, really getting that deep, understanding. And so, so that has allowed me to do the work I'm doing now. And that's why I was a Catholic. Okay. Because if I wasn't supposed to be doing this work, I never would have been a Catholic. I would have been, something else, some other things. So
correct.
But,
and which is why our soul puts us where we get put, because you can't teach what you don't know. So, well, I want to thank you for being here with me today. It's been really enlightening. I hope that my audience gets something really amazing out of this. As we know, we're here serving what I refer to as spiritual newbies, and that is those who have had their awakening and now they're hungry for greater spiritual understanding as they step out of that old fear-based paradigm. How then can they move up the spiritual spiral? And one of the ways to do that is to disbelieve what we've always believed about everything, and because all of our beliefs up until our spiritual awakening are based in fear, not that they're all based in fear, because of course within every religion are the basic spiritual principles that can be found in every religion, but there are boxes of beliefs that have been placed around them that make it difficult for people to have direct access to divine love, to source creator. And so what we're doing is creating an opportunity for people to look past their fear-based beliefs and what they've always believed. One of the ways to recognize if it's a fear-based belief is if there's some kind of condition attached to it. So God's love is pure, absolute, and unconditional. If there are any conditions around the beliefs, then you recognize them. It's really easy to spot them as fear. So what we're talking about really is what Yeshua stood for, is all things pure, all things love, all things light. There was no fear in anything that he taught. So if we're following a fear-based belief, know that that is not of the divine. It's a man-made belief. And what he was here for was to teach us how to move out of those fear-based beliefs and go direct to the one love that is and creates all things.
It's all about going into light and staying out of the darkness, because the fear comes from the darkness, and the light is all just love and acceptance. And, you know, he wasn't teaching about sinning. He was teaching about, and they were talking to me in my head while you were talking earlier, and they were saying to tell everybody that it's not about focused on the sinning. He was teaching people how to be accountable for their choices and their behavior.
Correct. Madam, thank you for being here with me today and for sharing this beautiful Christmas message with the world and sharing your understanding, your experience, your understanding of his pre-birth, his life, his purpose, and who and what he was really here to serve. And so for all of you that are watching, we wish you all, yes, a very happy Christmas, whether you celebrate Yeshua's life or not. This is really about the Christ consciousness that he brought forward to the planet, and the Christ consciousness we are all returning and restoring. This is really what the return of Christ is all about, is the return of Christ consciousness, and that each of us bring to the planet. And when we choose unconditional love rather than fear and judgment and blame and againstness and all of those fear-based beliefs. So thank you for being here. Thank you, all of you, for joining us today. And as I always say, remember to hold your light so high others can't help but see their own light. Together, we're creating a world of peace, love, harmony, freedom, and prosperity for all life on earth. And as always, get bold, be fearless, and live free.